So in this video, we're going to build this infographic using three of Excel's count functions: count, count A, and count blank. Question 1, how many records are there in the data set? What we're really asking here is how many rows are there in our table? So let's skip across to the sample data tab for a second. And one way to work out how many rows there are in a table is to take a column that we know is fully populated with numbers. So in this case, let's go for release year. And if we do equals count, I'm just going to do the top view to give you an example of how this works. So I'm going to pick those rows there and click enter. And that tells me there's 17. Now that count function only works with numbers. So if I did the same exercise over here on column J, equals count, open brackets, and then scroll down here, press enter, the answer will be 0 because there aren't any numbers in there and it can't count anything. So I've scrolled down this release year column and I've checked that all of the rows are populated. So in this instance, we can count off of this column. So at the top here, let's do count equals count, open brackets, click on the first row and then hold Control and Shift, press down, and that will take us to the bottom of our table. Close bracket and then hit enter, and that will give us a count of 470, which is the number of rows in this table. To complete question 1, let's just repeat the formula we've just done on the sample data tab. So equals count, open brackets, and then we're going to point to the sample data tab, pick the top record in there, Control Shift down, hit enter. You can see at the top here that it's picked the full range of that table. Hit enter and it will give us 470 in that box. Now, whilst we know that's the right answer because we've picked a column that we know to be valid in terms of it's fully populated, if something happened later, so let's say that some records were removed from here, from this column, click delete there. When we go back to the count tab, it now says 462. So that's not a fully reliable way of capturing all the records in the table that we'd expect to be populated. So we're going to come back to that later and improve it. Question 2, how many records have the duration field populated? So let's click back over to our sample data tab and have a look there. Before we put a formula in on this sheet, let me just show you how the Control Shift down functionality works in a table. If I click on the duration in minutes column, hit Control Shift down, it will take me to the bottom of the populated range. If I keep holding Control and Shift and press down again, I get to the bottom of the full table. Now, when we did that on release year, it was different. And that's because release year was a fully populated column. So if I do Control Shift and down on there, I get to the bottom of the table because it is the bottom of the populated range. Now we know from what we did a few minutes ago in the release year column that the count function will only count cells that have a number inside them. So not text, only a number. So in the duration in minutes column, if we do equals count, open brackets, click on the first one there, hit Control Shift down, that will take us to the bottom of the populated range, hit down again, and we've now got the full table. Hit enter. And that tells us there is 430 numbers in that column. That means there's a number of rows that are not populated. So the main purpose of this video is to show you the count function, but as we know, that's a little bit restricted to only counting cells that contain numbers. If we wanted to count how many cells contain something that wasn't blank, let me show you another tip now on how we can do that. If we take the formula that we've put in cell F1 up here, and then in the bottom right of the cell, you'll see that if you hover over it, it turns to this black plus icon. We hold that and drag it across G, H and I. It will perform that same formula but for each of those columns respectively. And you can see here that it's done 470 because that's the number of populated cells in the position column. In rating though, it's text, so it's been unable to count them, and that's the same for Studio. If we click into H1, the formula that we've put in above the rating column, we can see that it's changed the letter automatically, but it's kept the range 4 to 473, which we know to be the full record set of our table. All we need to do to get it to count text is just put an A after the count word, and that just means count all, and that means it will count numbers, it will count text and everything. If we hit enter on that, we'll get 430, because there's 430 populated things in this rating column. If we scroll that across to Studio, we can see it's the same for Studio. So let's just check that. If we do Control Shift down and then down again, we can see we've got some blank rows at the bottom of that column as well. So you may be thinking at this point, why don't I just use count A for everything, seeing as it handles numbers and text and therefore it's pretty universal? And actually, that's probably the right thing to do for most scenarios, because most of your columns will be numbers or they'll be text. But what about if you've got a column that is numbers and text mixed up, and you need to understand how many numbers are populated? Let me show you how to do that and why it's important to know the difference between the two. If in here we put equals count, and then we scroll down here, we can see we've got a mixture of numbers and letters. So hit enter on there and we get 5. That's because there's 5 numbers and it can count how many numbers are present in this list. If I do equals count A, it's going to count numbers and letters. So if we scroll down there, we're going to get an answer of 10. So you can see the importance of understanding both functions and using them where necessary. Question 3, how many records in the duration field are blank? So I'm going to show you another counting formula now, which is called count blank, and it does exactly what it sounds like it does. So if we do equals count blank, open brackets, and then into our sample data tab, again, click on the top record in the duration column, hold Control Shift down to get to the bottom of the populated range, down again to get to the whole table range, hit enter, and it will tell us that there is 40 records that are not populated. Now that makes a lot of sense because we know we've got 470 total records, 430 that are populated. So in theory, 40 would be left unpopulated. So those numbers add up and make sense. It's at this point I'm going to go back to question 1 and change the way we get to this number 470. So in here, I'm just going to show you the new method. So equals 430 from this cell here plus 40. So we're going to take how many populated records there are and add on how many non-populated records there are, which must give us the answer of how many records there are in total. So we just hit enter there. You'll see that it says 470. Now the benefit of this approach versus the one in here where we use the count on the sample data column L is that if I delete some of this populated field out, so if I just delete all of those cells there, we go back to our worksheet and we can see that this has dropped down to 454. That is not the total number of records in our data set, but 470 is. That's why it's a better way of getting it. So let's drop that into there, equals 430 plus 40, enter, and delete this one. Question 4 asks us what percentage of the duration field is populated. Now we're really confident that the numbers in question 1, 2 and 3 are correct and they're not going to be influenced by data being removed and those sort of things. We can do a confident assessment of that percentage. So if we do equals 430 divided by the total number of records, that's the number of populated records divided by the total number of records, and hit enter, we're going to get 91.49%. Now over to the right, I've built a chart using a ring or a donut chart, and in the middle of that I've put some data. So I'm going to show you how that works in a minute. The reason it didn't populate before is it had no data to do so because it is driven off these two cells here. So question 5 asks us what percentage of the duration field is blank. So in a similar way, we're going to do equals 40 this time, divided by that 470, hit enter, and we get 8.51%. That completes our donut chart, and then we've just used these cells here, so 430 and 470, to put them in the middle of the donut chart. 8.5% and 91.5% on their own don't tell you much, because that could be 3 or 4 records, or it could be 1 million records. This just gives you some kind of context to the numbers that we're dealing with. So to make this chart appear as it does, I've had to get a little bit creative. So let me show you how I've done that. If I right click on the chart, change series chart type and go into pie, you can see that a normal pie would just not have that gap in the middle. So if I click OK, that's what it looks like. If I change again and go to pie and this time pick the donut and click OK, what it looks like is that it's got white space around it in this square and then white space in the middle. That isn't actually the case. So if we just change in format and go to shape fill and change it to blue, you can see that it actually fills everything in blue around the chart and in the middle of it. And we can no longer see our red text. If we do white, we get exactly the same thing. Our red text has disappeared. What we need to do is set it to no fill. What that's now done is made the background in the center of the graph transparent. What I can now do is move it out of the way, and you'll see all I've done here is equals our cells over to the left. So that one just equals cell C10, that one equals cell C5, and these are just words that I've typed in the cell. I then move our transparent middle donut chart over the top of it, and it looks like it's all one visual. In order to highlight all of the records in the duration column that aren't populated, I've added a slicer over to the left, and then if I just click on blank, I'll get all of the records where I don't have anything in the duration column. If you want to know how to do slicers, have a look at course 1 that's on my channel, and it will show you how to do that, and also how to make them look pretty as they do on this particular example. So now let's fully populate the duration field in our sample data tab and see how it affects the infographic. Just to populate the data for now, I'm just going to put 100 into each of the duration in minutes columns. So just scroll that down. And then if we go back to our count, we can see that we've got populated fields 100%, 470 out of 470, and blank fields 0%. What you've also probably noticed is that the text inside the ring of the donut has actually changed to green. Now it's fully populated. Now I've not done that manually. I've used something called conditional formatting. If you want to know more about that, subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be doing a video on it in the next few weeks. Just to prove to you that it's not a manual thing and it is automatic, I've just changed these to manual entry for now. So I can overtype them. So if I do 430 in there, you can see it goes to red. If I change that to 400, it stays red. Going back to 470 though, we get fully populated and it turns to green.